Imagine spending your final days on Earth, surrounded not by peace and love, but by constant harassment from people who care more about lawn rules than human life. Now, imagine this happening to a decorated war hero, a man who risked everything so others could live free, only to face cruelty from his very own neighbors when he needed compassion the most. That's exactly what happened to Colonel James Walker, and his story will leave you speechless. The neighborhood had always seemed so quiet, so peaceful. Rows of manicured lawns, mailboxes painted in regulation colors, and streets lined with perfectly trimmed hedges gave the impression of a community built on harmony. But behind one ordinary front door lived a man whose very existence contradicted the pettiness of the rules surrounding him. His name was Colonel James "Jim" Walker, an 82-year-old war hero who had once led battalions into battle and saved countless lives overseas. Now, in the twilight of his years, he was fighting a different kind of war, one against his own body, and shockingly, against his own HOA. Jim had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer, and every doctor agreed he didn't have much time left. Hospice care had been arranged in his home, where he could be surrounded by the people who loved him most. His daughter, Emily, had taken a leave from work to care for him. His son drove several states to visit every weekend, and neighbors who knew his story stopped by often, bringing meals, flowers, or simply their company. The street was no longer silent. It became a stream of visitors, friends, and family, all rallying around a man who had given everything for his country. But where most saw compassion, love, and respect, the HOA board saw a problem. It started with a letter, taped crudely to Jim's door one morning. The letter wasn't a get-well card or words of comfort. It was a notice. It read, "This is a formal reminder that excessive vehicle congestion and street parking violates community regulations. Several residents have reported discomfort at the number of vehicles coming and going from your property. Please resolve this immediately, or fines will be issued." Emily stared at the paper in disbelief. She had just spent a sleepless night tending to her father's pain, adjusting his medications, and trying to comfort him through his moans. Now, instead of finding support from her neighbors, she was holding a threat. When she showed Jim the notice, he laughed weakly, though his eyes carried that same fire that had led him through war. "Imagine that," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I fought so men like them could live free, and now they're upset because my family parks on the street to say goodbye to me." Emily wanted to crumple the letter, but Jim shook his head. "No, Em. Don't throw it away, keep it. Someday people should know what kind of battles we fight when the real enemies are supposed to be behind us." The visits continued. How could they not? Friends who had served alongside Jim came in uniform, saluting him one last time. Neighbors who'd heard of his story brought their children, urging them to thank him for his service. Every car parked outside carried love, grief, and respect. And every day the HOA seethed. The second notice was worse than the first. This time it wasn't just about cars. It accused Emily of hosting unauthorized gatherings that disrupted the neighborhood's peace. They gave her 48 hours to comply or face fines that would snowball daily. Emily's hands trembled as she read it, standing in the kitchen while her father, frail and thin, sipped broth in the next room. She stormed into the HOA office the next morning. The room smelled of fresh coffee and smugness. At the center sat Margaret Green, the HOA president, a woman in her late 60s with a sharp bob haircut and an expression as stiff as her pearl necklace. "Mrs. Green," Emily began, her voice shaking with restrained fury, "my father is dying. Those cars you're complaining about, those are his family and friends, people saying their last goodbyes. Are you really that heartless?" Margaret Green didn't flinch. She adjusted her glasses, shuffled the papers on her desk, and gave Emily a tight smile that carried no warmth. "Miss Walker," she said, her voice dripping with authority, "this is not a matter of personal circumstances. Rules are rules. When your father bought his home here, he agreed to abide by them. Excessive visitors disrupt the uniformity and tranquility of the neighborhood. If we allow this once, it sets a precedent." Emily's fists clenched at her sides. "Precedent?" she snapped. "My father spent decades serving this country. He nearly died 3 times overseas, leading men half his age. He lost friends, he lost parts of himself. Also, you and everyone here could live in peace. And now when he's in his last days, you think a few cars parked outside is more important than compassion? But Margaret didn't budge. To her, the HOA's rulebook was scripture, and nothing, not even death, could outweigh the fine print. She repeated the same line again. We are simply enforcing the standards that keep this community valuable. Emily stormed out, shaking with rage. She got home to find her father resting in his armchair, an old photo album spread across his lap. He looked up when she entered, saw her red eyes, and gave her a weak but knowing smile. "Margaret again?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, biting her lip to keep from crying. Jim sighed, flipping the page of his album. A picture of him as a young officer in uniform standing with his platoon stared back at him. "You know, Em, I've faced dictators with more heart than that woman." The next week only grew worse. Every day seemed to bring another letter, another warning, another thinly veiled threat. The fines began stacking up, $100, then $250, then $500. Emily ignored them at first, but the letters started mentioning legal action and the stress weighed heavy on her already exhausted shoulders. Despite it all, the visitors never stopped coming. Jim's old war buddy, Colonel Harris, drove 4 hours just to sit with him for an afternoon. A young man, barely in his 20s, knocked on the door one evening. He introduced himself as the grandson of one of Jim's fallen comrades. "My granddad always said your father saved his life," he told Emily. "I just wanted to thank him myself." Jim cried that night for the first time in years, not from pain, not from weakness, but from the weight of a life remembered and honored. But while his home was filled with love, just down the street Margaret Green was fuming. She held emergency HOA meetings where she painted Jim and his family as a nuisance. She showed pictures of cars lined up on the curb, complained about noise, and even claimed that Emily's driveway had oil stains from so many visitors. "We cannot let this get out of hand," she insisted to the board. "Today it's gatherings for one man. Tomorrow it's parties, block events, and chaos. If we don't enforce the rules, this community will fall apart." A few board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some of them respected Jim, even admired him. But Margaret's grip on power was strong, and no one dared openly defy her. Things escalated when a tow truck arrived one afternoon. Emily had just stepped outside to grab the mail when she saw the truck pulling up behind her brother's car. "What are you doing?" she shouted, running toward it. The driver shrugged, holding a clipboard. "Got orders from the HOA. Street parking's a violation." Emily stood in front of the car, arms outstretched. "My father is dying inside that house. You are not taking this car." The driver hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but Margaret appeared at that exact moment, marching down the sidewalk like a queen surveying her kingdom. "Step aside, Miss Walker," she demanded. "You cannot obstruct HOA enforcement." Emily's voice cracked as she screamed back, "He is a war hero. He gave everything for this country, and you can't even let him die in peace." The standoff grew tense, neighbors peeking through blinds, whispers traveling from house to house. Finally, the tow truck left, but Margaret promised, "This isn't over." That night, Emily sat by her father's bedside, her hands trembling. "Dad, I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I can't keep fighting them and caring for you at the same time. It's killing me." Jim reached over, his frail hand resting on hers. His eyes, though tired, burned with resolve. "Then don't fight for me, Em. Fight for what's right. These people think they're powerful because they have rules and fines. But real power isn't in rules. It's in people. You gather enough voices and no HOA president can stand against you." Emily wiped her tears and nodded. For the first time, she felt a spark of determination stronger than her anger. The next morning, she made a plan. Emily didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop scrolling through forums, HOA horror stories, and neighborhood laws. She realized something important. The HOA only had power if the community allowed it. Margaret might act like a dictator, but her authority came from the very neighbors who were now quietly watching everything unfold. So Emily decided it was time to flip the script. The next day, instead of hiding in fear of fines, She started talking to people. One by one, she knocked on doors, explained her father's situation, and showed them the notices and threats. Most of the neighbors were horrified. Some admitted they'd been scared of Margaret too, but hearing about Jim, his service, his condition, and the harassment lit a fire in them. "Colonel Walker, the Colonel Walker," one elderly man exclaimed. "He taught my boy at ROTC. That man's a hero. Margaret's gone too far this time." By the end of the week, Emily had gathered dozens of neighbors who were ready to stand up for her father. She created a petition demanding the HOA drop all fines and harassment, and within days, it spread like wildfire, not just through the neighborhood, but online. Local veterans groups picked it up, and soon hundreds of signatures poured in. The breaking point came on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Emily had organized what she called a final salute gathering. It wasn't a party, wasn't a violation. It was a tribute. Friends, neighbors, veterans, and even strangers who had heard the story showed up. Cars lined the street for blocks, American flags waved proudly, and a small honor guard of veterans stood in formation on Jim's lawn. Inside, Jim was too weak to walk, but Emily wheeled him to the front door. The crowd erupted in applause as he appeared, frail but smiling. Some saluted, others wiped tears, and children waved small flags in his honor. Margaret, of course, couldn't stay away. She stormed down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, snapping photos of cars and shouting about violations. But this time, something was different. Nobody cowered. Instead, a group of veterans walked right up to her. Colonel Harris, Jim's old friend, stood at the front. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "with all due respect, this man fought for your freedom to live in this neighborhood. Today, you will not disgrace him." The crowd cheered, drowning out Margaret's protests. Cameras clicked, cell phones recorded, and within hours, videos of Margaret yelling at a dying veteran's tribute went viral online. By Monday morning, local news stations were camped outside the neighborhood. Reporters interviewed Emily, neighbors, and fellow veterans, painting Margaret as the face of heartless bureaucracy. The HOA board, sensing the storm, scrambled into emergency meetings. Within days, Margaret Green resigned as HOA president under immense public pressure. The fines against Jim's family were dropped, and the board issued a formal apology. Not that it could erase the damage, but it was a symbolic victory. But the greatest moment came just days later. Jim, weak but smiling, sat surrounded by his family and closest friends. He had seen his community come together, had heard the chants of "Thank you, Colonel" from strangers, and knew that even in his final battle he hadn't been defeated. That night, as Emily held his hand, he whispered softly, "CM, real power isn't in rules, it's in people, and you proved it." Colonel James Walker passed away peacefully a week later, with his family at his side. His funeral drew hundreds, many of them strangers who had heard his story. Flags lined the streets, and veterans stood shoulder to shoulder in silent salute. The HOA never recovered its reputation, and Margaret became a cautionary tale of what happens when cruelty meets compassion. For the rest of the community, Jim's story became a reminder that even in the face of pettiness and cruelty, dignity and unity will always win. And for Emily, it was a legacy she carried forward, a promise that her father's final battle had not been in vain.